Which is why Bottle 61, Taylor Fladgate 1982 Late Bottled Vintage Port is one of the most amazing things I've discovered in Grandma's collection. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Port. There's nothing so elegant as relaxing by the fire after dinner with some chocolate, or a cigar if that's your thing, and a glass of deep ruby red liquid. While there are tawny ports and even white ports, that deep red color is so synonymous with port wine that we use port as a color word. Which is why Bottle 61, Taylor Fladgate 1982 Late Bottled Vintage Port is one of the most amazing things I've discovered in Grandma's collection. And not because of who made it or how old it is, but because it is nothing like what I would expect a late bottled vintage port to be. Instead, it is perfectly clear and nearly colorless. As I talked about in Reveal 12, all the color from this bottle has sedimented out or faded. Now, some styles of port are known for having a lot of sediment, but as I'll talk about in a minute, when Taylor Fladgate introduced this style of port in 1970, avoiding sediment was one of their goals. Now, red wines do generally change color as they age, typically turning orange or brownish over time. Tiny bottle number 8 is a bottle of red wine from California in the 60s or 70s, and it too is nearly colorless now. I blame age and storage conditions. I'm pretty sure this collection spent some of its life in non-climate controlled areas in Canada. The bottles have probably seen at least one and maybe many freeze-thaw cycles, and I've got to think that that would impact color. Now that I've talked about the colorless elephant in the room, it's time to talk about port. Port comes from the Douro Valley in Portugal and starts with a mixture of different local red wine grapes. When making port, the maker will stop the fermentation of the grapes about halfway through by adding unaged brandy. Because the yeast haven't yet turned all of that sugar into alcohol, the resulting port retains quite a lot of sweetness, and the added alcohol makes for a fortified wine of around 20% ABV. There are a number of different port styles. Vintage ports are the cream of the crop, with less than 1% of ports getting that designation, and only in years that are deemed good enough to declare a vintage. They are designed for long bottle aging before drinking and are typically very expensive. If a port is not selected to be a vintage port, then it can go in a few different directions. Tawny ports are aged in small barrels, usually for a long time, and experience some oxidation in addition to picking up some brown color and vanilla and caramel notes from the wood. Ruby ports are aged in big barrels for a short period of time. They still have the fruity character and tannins that you'd expect from a red wine. Both tawny and ruby ports will have wines from multiple years blended together. My Tiny Bottle is a late bottled vintage port, abbreviated to LBV. This style is intended to give you something closer to the experience of drinking a vintage port, but at a much cheaper price tag, and without having to wait years for it to age and mellow in the bottle. In a vintage port, the wine is aged for less than 2 years before bottling. For an LBV port, high-quality wine from a single year is aged for 4 to 6 years before being bottled. Because it's already done its mellowing in the barrel, it can be drunk right away. The maker of my bottle is Taylor Fladgate, and they claim to have originated the LBV style in 1970 when they released a 1965 LBV. As part of the process of making them drinkable right away, Taylor Fladgate filters and fines their LBV wines so they shouldn't give off a lot of sediment like a vintage port would. But, well, here we are with a clear bottle of LBV port with a bunch of sediment at the bottom. The wine in this particular bottle was made in 1982 and bottled in 1987, so this is another one where dating the bottle is the easy part. The hard part is imagining what it's going to taste like. From the little I could find out about clear bottles from Googling, I don't think there's any point in trying to shake the color back in. That would just result in bits of floaty stuff in the wine. So I will be carefully pouring it off the top. I did find one review written in 1999. The reviewer said it had been a superb vintage when they tasted it in 1989, but they didn't even give it a rating in 99 because it was proof that you should not store an LBV too long. Back then they said it was still enjoyable, but here we are, 25 years after that review and 42 years after this wine was made, so it's certainly going to be interesting. Have you ever encountered a bottle of red wine gone clear? Drop a comment and tell me all about it. Hit the like and subscribe buttons while you're there. I've also launched a Patreon. Look for the link in the show notes to find out more about that. You can head to mytinybottles.com to see close-up pictures of this bottle and all the bottles. And of course, follow me at mytinybottles on social media. Cheers!